I never thought that my life would come crashing down in such a dramatic way. Sitting in an ambulance, watching my infidelity spiral out of control as I accompanied the man I shouldn't have been with to the hospital after my husband nearly shattered him. My name is Sandra, and for 5 years I have been married to Leo. We've built our life in Detroit, Michigan, but 2 weeks ago, everything changed. I had never seen this violent side of him, and now the thought of facing him, begging for forgiveness, fills me with terror. Our marriage began with deep love, mutual respect, and a true friendship. Leo and I had been close friends for years, weathering life's storms together. Yet as time wore on, the bond began to fray. We have 2 children, a boy and a girl, but they no longer live with either of us. Our toxic situation even forced our parents to step in, insisting that the kids be kept away. A decision that enraged Leo while I knew I wasn't emotionally fit to care for them right now. The cracks in our relationship only widened after the birth of our second child 2 years ago. Every day, heated arguments erupted over my insecurities about Leo's job. As childish as it sounds, I despised watching him leave for work with attractive, intelligent women as colleagues, which only deepened my feelings of inadequacy. I had no college degree and no career to focus on. I was solely a housewife. Part of me longed for him to step away from work, to embrace home life and take on raising the kids with me, if only for a little while. But Leo always insisted that his job was what kept our family afloat, and a break was never on the table. Eventually, his father stepped in to calm the storm, and things seemed to reset, at least for a short period. Then temptation struck and tested my loyalty, and I faltered. About a year ago, I flew down to Alabama for my best friend's wedding, a trip that was nearly 14 hours of travel from Detroit, an entire day on a plane. Leo wasn't thrilled about the idea of leaving our 2 young children behind for a week-long event. He even demanded I bring our 1-year-old along. I refused, convinced that he should handle childcare, since I had been doing it for years. It didn't make sense to me that he couldn't manage for just 1 week. Despite his protests about work and busy schedule, I made up my mind. I left for Alabama without telling him, leaving our kids behind. I know many would label me a bad mother, but I only craved a break. That trip, an escape from the constant pressure, turned out to be the biggest test my marriage would ever face. Alone in Alabama for 14 hours flight and immersed in an unfamiliar environment, I was forced to face my own conscience. And as fate would have it, I wasn't prepared for what was to come. I never claimed to be a saint, and the truth hit me the moment I saw the handsome men roaming around. At the cocktail party held 3 nights before the wedding, I met Kevin, a man whose persistence and charm were impossible to ignore. At first I tried to say no, but there was something about his confident gaze and irresistible energy that pulled me in. Despite knowing I was married, I found myself flirting, laughing, and slowly succumbing to his allure. Kevin embodied temptation. His smile, his teasing touches, all of it was so exquisitely dangerous that I couldn't step away. In that moment, I knowingly betrayed Leo. I can't pin all the blame on Kevin. My own desire led me astray. I encouraged his advances and even went as far as concealing my marital status, hiding my wedding ring, and erasing photos of my family from my phone's home screen. I wanted to reinvent myself as a free, single woman, a facade that revealed just how deeply I was drawn into his arms. Many will call my actions disgraceful, and I wouldn't disagree. But explain to me, what do you do when temptation dances right in front of your eyes day after day? I had lost control, and Kevin played his cards perfectly. Every compliment he gave, every lingering, electrifying touch, made me forget the heavy responsibilities waiting at home. For once, I wasn't defined by past quarrels, by the fraught memories of married life, responsibilities, and faults. I even began to understand why Leo always urged me to bring the kids along. Their presence would have anchored me to reality. In Alabama, I was known only by my best friend and her husband, and with everyone else distracted by the wedding chaos, I felt dangerously invisible. At that cocktail party, teasing whispers and flirtatious glances led to more than mere conversation. Kevin whispered sweet nothings in my ear that made me giggle like a teenager. Before I knew it, I had kissed him more than 3 times throughout the night. I was fully aware of the risks, yet when he invited me to his room, I didn't resist. We talked for hours, and his compliments filled the gaps in my heart, calling me the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Normally, I wouldn't be swayed by such words, but On that vulnerable, reckless night, I couldn't help but surrender completely. And then from casual kissing, it escalated until I lost all self-control. The next morning, I found myself wrapped in the morning after haze, sharing a shameless shower with him, having breakfast in his hotel room, and spending the entire day just soaking up his attention. I even skipped an important bridesmaid brunch with my best friend. Nothing mattered except the intoxicating pull of the moment. I dreaded the thought of returning to reality, facing Leo, my children, and the inescapable guilt. And yet the guilt was too weak to pull me away. So I let the days slip by as I moved from my hotel to his room, letting the affair deepen. For that brief week, I lived as a wife to a man I barely knew before ever setting foot in Alabama. On my final day, Kevin promised he would visit me in Detroit whenever possible. Although he mentioned that he was originally from Detroit and still had family there, I sensed an ominous warning in that promise. I knew deep down that if our paths crossed again, the dangerous allure could upend the fragile semblance of my real-life chaos. I was forced into keeping the affair as secret as possible, ensuring that neither Kevin nor my husband would ever realize the tangled web I had woven. But karma, as it often does, had its own plan in store. When the inevitable happened, Kevin's reunion with Leo resulted in violently broken bones. The nightmare took on a whole new dimension. Before that brutal encounter, however, a series of unsettling events had been unfolding. Leo hadn't been completely in the dark about my actions. The moment I returned from Alabama, his eyes were fixed on me, scrutinizing every move like a predator on the prowl. In life, I've learned that those with something to hide often work too hard to appear normal. That's exactly what I did, and in doing so, I gave Leo a reason to suspect something was terribly off. For a married woman who had never before been unfaithful, even a single slip felt suffocating. Leo isn't a man you can easily fool. His natural confidence and fine-tuned intuition stood firm from the start, especially when he noticed I left for Alabama without taking our daughter along, an insult that cut deep. I had left in the early morning darkness before Leo was even awake, a move that spoke volumes of disrespect. When I returned, the tension in our home was unbearable. Leo's frustration exploded as he confronted me about my secretive departure. Overwhelmed by my own guilt, I tried to brush aside his questions with feeble excuses, even admitting that I had disrespected him. But Leo wasn't easily placated. Every word, every pause made it clear he believed I was hiding something. Deep inside, I knew he was right, yet I couldn't bring myself to confess that I had completely betrayed him. Instead, I resorted to gaslighting him, feigning normality, hoping that time would wash away his suspicions. I slipped back into the daily routines of a housewife, pretending everything was fine, even as the air between us crackled with unspoken accusations. For a few fleeting weeks, it seemed like the storm had passed and normalcy resumed. I attempted to forget about Kevin and the reckless nights in Alabama, but our silence was shattered when he reemerged with news that shocked me to my core. Kevin was in Detroit. The mere thought of him being in the same city sent a ripple of dread through my entire being. There was no excitement, just overwhelming panic. I knew he was trouble, and that one encounter in Detroit could shatter everything I'd fought to keep hidden. Despite my better judgment, his insistence wore me down until I reluctantly agreed to meet him for lunch. That luncheon was a masterpiece of awkwardness. The moment Kevin entered, I felt I was in deep, deep trouble. At the meal, he couldn't keep his hands off me, even though we were in plain sight in a busy restaurant. Every glance around me was a desperate search for familiar faces, a silent prayer that none of the people I knew were watching. Kevin, unbothered by our public setting, continued his relentless advances. After lunch, I had to rush home to prepare dinner for Leo and collect the kids from school. My heart pounded with the fear of discovery, yet every step I took felt calculated, even as I fell behind schedule. When Leo finally came home, the moment he walked through the door, his eyes revealed a storm brewing. He wasted no time asking if I had left the house that day. I was caught off guard. I hadn't mentioned anything about meeting anyone. His anger escalated when he confronted me about leaving the kids waiting at school for nearly an hour. In that crushing moment, I realized I had been found out. I scrambled for a weak excuse concerning a slow checkout at the grocery store, a flimsy lie that worked only temporarily. I foolishly underestimated his determination to uncover the truth. Later, as if fate wasn't cruel enough, Kevin called me again, this time inviting me for dinner. My internal alarm was on maximum, But before I knew it, temptation had me agreeing to slip out at night. Leaving home that night was nerve-wracking. I had to wait until the kids were asleep and until Leo's early bedtime, maneuvering through every second with painstakingly careful steps. Finally, once Leo was sound asleep, I crept out to meet Kevin, who had already arranged for us at a nearby hotel. I made clear that I couldn't stay the night, but Kevin pleaded, coaxing me to extend our time together. And every time I was with him, it was as if all of my common sense evaporated. Until that fateful night when my reckless decisions led me into a scenario I couldn't escape. I flirted openly, kissed him passionately in public, and convinced myself that because Leo was asleep, nothing could go wrong. But when I returned home the next morning, my heart nearly stopped. There, scattered around the front of my house, were my belongings. Clothes, shoes, personal effects, thrown out for the world to see. Every woman's nightmare had come true. Amid the overwhelming panic, I forced myself inside only to be met with an even harsher scene. Both Leo's parents and my own stood in the living room. I was completely blindsided. Before I knew it, Leo pulled out his phone and played a video, one that clearly showed me passionately kissing Kevin in a hotel restaurant just the night before. I was frozen, rendered speechless by the undeniable truth. Then, as if in a surreal haze, our parents began arguing about custody right there in front of me. Everything unraveled so fast that I barely had time to process the betrayal and ensuing chaos. In a blur, my own mother seized me by the hair and dragged me from the home, her disappointment and anger filling every word she spoke. I stood mute, paralyzed by shock at finally being caught, despite every effort to be cautious. It turned out that Leo had followed me when he first noticed my erratic behavior, and that single misstep had all led here. The next day, desperate and alone, I called Kevin and confessed everything. The truth of my crumbling marriage and how Leo had thrown me out. Kevin's reaction was a volatile mix of fury and indifference. Although he was upset about my deception, he brushed it off by saying that his own relationship issues made my infidelity somewhat irrelevant. When I asked if I could come back to Alabama, he refused, insisting instead on confronting Leo for answers. I knew then that I was teetering on the edge of disaster, but I never imagined how catastrophic it would become. Before I fully grasped what was unfolding, Kevin had convinced me to take him to Leo's house. When we arrived, Kevin knocked persistently until Leo finally opened the door. The moment Leo saw me standing there with Kevin by my side, he understood perfectly why we'd come. Kevin, trying to assert his dominance, raised his voice and demanded, "How dare you throw the mother of your children out like that?" Even I winced at the harshness of his words. Leo, unimpressed and steely-eyed, attempted to close the door on us, but Kevin blocked it, insisting, "I'm asking you a question." What happened next felt surreal. In an instant, Leo grabbed Kevin by the shoulder, drove his knees into his stomach with brutal precision, and then landed a devastating punch to his face. Everything happened in a blur. Kevin's anguished shouts and the sickening sounds of him flinching filled the air. Leo's fury far surpassed Kevin's resistance. I tried to intervene only when I saw blood gushing from Kevin's knee, and in that desperate moment, I rushed between them to break up the fight. That was a grave mistake. Leo snarled, shoving me aside without a second thought, and I tumbled to the ground as the intensity of his anger rendered me helpless. Realizing that he wouldn't listen to reason, I ran outside in search of help, my heart pounding with panic. Eventually, a man stepped in and pulled Leo off Kevin, who by then was barely standing. With trembling hands and shaking voice, I dialed for an ambulance. I could hardly believe that I had just accompanied my affair partner in an ambulance after Leo's brutal assault left him with shattered bones. And to add insult to injury, Kevin, despite everything, made no effort to accept responsibility. Instead, he publicly humiliated me, shoving me aside like I was nothing, and made me pay his medical bills. Not only that, but he ended things by blocking my number, swearing I'd never contact him again, and even threatening legal action against both me and Leo if I didn't cover his hospital expenses. I remember promising myself I would someday beg Leo for forgiveness, maybe even appeal to our parents for reconciliation. But that fantasy shattered along with my life. Leo has now filed for divorce, and there is no hope left for forgiveness. He even revealed to our parents about my audacity of dragging my affair partner into our home, a secret I had fought so hard to keep. Their overwhelming disappointment and shame were unbearable, and they demanded that I move out immediately. With all my savings drained to cover Kevin's hospital bills, I found myself destitute and alone, further tormented by the knowledge that Kevin had completely ghosted me. Every time I step outside, I feel the weight of that humiliation, the public memory of the chaos and the brutal fight that unfolded. I am drowning in shame. As if life wasn't cruel enough, I'm now caught in the midst of a bitter divorce and a ruthless custody battle. Leo has vowed not to pay any child support while fighting for full custody of our children. He's amassed evidence to prove that I neglected our kids, alleging I abandoned them to chase reckless dates, even leaving them for an entire week to attend a wedding. With his powerhouse legal team, it looks like I'm destined to lose in court. Hasn't fate punished me enough already? The mental, emotional, and financial toll is overwhelming. I feel utterly defeated. When the court finally ruled in Leo's favor, granting him full custody, my entire world crashed down. Left standing in silence as the judge's words sank in, I not only lost my children, but was burdened with child support payments I couldn't afford and relegated to supervised visits, a painful demotion from the mother I once was. In desperation, I turned to my parents for help, but found only cold indifference. Their disappointed stares were more painful than any words they could have said. My own mother refused to even meet my gaze, saying I had made my bed and now must lie in it. In a final act of desperation, I reached out to Leo. I begged him to reconsider, to grant me at least some chance to see our children more often. But he met my plea with a detached coldness, telling me to simply move on, and then he walked away, closing the door on my pleas forever. Now 7 months have passed and Leo has moved on, dating someone new, someone who appears to be building the perfect family with my children, a life that leaves me on the outside, drowned in regret. Watching them, I can do nothing but stew in my heartbreak and remorse as the man I once loved builds a future that no longer has room for me. I share my story here on our channel, hoping that you, dear listeners, will join the conversation. Comment below with your thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Your support means more than you know. And if you find the story compelling, please consider liking and subscribing for more raw, honest narratives. This is my reality now. A life meant to be full of love and promise, now replaced by quiet shame, regret, and the bitter aftermath of my decisions. Every day is a struggle to survive the fallout of a single, irretrievable mistake. As I face a future where forgiveness is a distant memory and hope is nothing more than a forlorn whisper.